The security guard's hand slammed her against the car. The camera was rolling. The world was watching. And in that moment, Detective Quincy Chambers made one call that would destroy an entire empire built on prejudice. This is the true story of how one woman's courage exposed a corporation's darkest secret and changed the law forever. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this message of justice has traveled. The fluorescent lights of the Apex gas station flickered against the Atlanta night sky like tired stars refusing to surrender to dawn. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday in late September, and Detective Quincy Chambers had exactly 13 minutes left in what had been the longest shift of her career. 13 minutes until she could clock out, drive home, and collapse into the kind of sleep that only comes after 12 hours of chasing ghosts through bureaucracy and bad coffee. Her unmarked sedan rolled into pump number 7 with a familiar groan, the same pump she'd used every Thursday for the past 3 years. This gas station sat exactly halfway between the Metropolitan Police Department's downtown precinct and her modest townhouse in the Old Fourth Ward. It was convenient. It was routine. It was safe. Or so she thought. Quincy stepped out of her vehicle, her tan trench coat catching the September breeze. Beneath it, her service weapon rested in its holster, invisible to the casual observer. She didn't look like a cop tonight. She looked like what she was in this moment, a tired 34-year-old black woman who just wanted to go home. The weight of the day pressed against her shoulders like a physical thing. The Johnson case, a domestic violence situation that had escalated into a standoff, had drained every ounce of her emotional reserves. She'd spent 2 hours talking a man down from a ledge, both literally and figuratively, and then another 3 hours drowning in paperwork that would justify every second of those 2 hours. She swiped her corporate card, the Metropolitan Police Department's fleet card, and began pumping gas. The numbers on the display climbed in their mechanical rhythm: $23.47, $23.89, $24.12. Inside the gas station's convenience store, Wade Montenegro watched her through the reinforced glass. Wade was new. 23 years old, with a security guard certification that was barely 2 months old, and an ego that had been inflated by 6 weeks of corporate training. He'd been hired by Sentinel Security Solutions, a private firm that contracted guards to businesses across the Southeast. This was his first solo night shift, and he was determined to prove himself. His trainer's words echoed in his head like a mantra. Trust your instincts. Profile assessment isn't racist, it's realistic. Look for inconsistencies. A person's appearance should match their transaction. High-value cards in unexpected hands. That's your red flag. Wade studied Quincy through the glass. Tan coat, jeans, natural hair pulled back, dark skin. Using a corporate card on a vehicle that looked average. Not luxury, not new. The pieces didn't fit the puzzle his training had taught him to assemble. His hand moved to his radio. Apex station to dispatch. Possible fraud in progress, pump 7. Requesting guidance. The voice that crackled back was bored. Description: black female mid-30s using what appears to be a corporate card. Vehicle doesn't match the profile. There was a pause. Then, your call, Montenegro. You're on site. Wade straightened his shoulders and pushed through the glass door into the night. Quincy heard the footsteps before she saw him. Heavy boots on concrete, moving with purpose. She glanced over her shoulder and saw the security guard approaching, his hand resting on his belt, in that universal gesture of male authority. She'd seen it 1,000 times. She'd been on the giving end of it 1,000 times more. But tonight she was just a woman at a gas station, and the sight of it made something in her chest tighten. "Excuse me, ma'am." Wade's voice carried the kind of false politeness that barely masked suspicion. "I need to see some identification." Quincy turned slowly, the gas pump still running. "Is there a problem, officer?" "I'm not an officer, I'm security. And yes, there's a problem. That card you're using, I need to verify it belongs to you." The words hit her like a slap. Quincy had been a police detective for 9 years. She'd worked her way up from patrol, had survived 3 internal affairs investigations that cleared her completely, had solved cases that made the evening news. She knew every shade of suspicion, every tone of accusation. This wasn't about fraud. This was about something else entirely. "The card belongs to my employer," Quincy said, her voice steady, despite the anger beginning to simmer beneath her skin. "The Metropolitan Police Department. I'm a detective. This is my fleet card." Wade's eyes narrowed. "You're telling me you're a cop?" "I'm telling you, I'm a detective, and I'm using my department-issued card to fuel my department vehicle. Is there anything else I can help you with tonight?" The sarcasm in that last sentence was subtle, but Wade caught it. His jaw tightened. "I'm going to need to see identification and proof that card is authorized for your use." Quincy felt the exhaustion of the day crystallize into something sharper. She could comply. She could pull out her badge and her ID and make this go away in 30 seconds. But something in Wade's posture, in the way his hand kept drifting toward the baton on his hip, in the way his eyes scanned her like she was a suspect rather than a customer, something in all of it made her pause. "Am I being detained?" she asked, her voice dropping into the official register she used in interrogation rooms. "You're being questioned about potential fraud." "Based on what probable cause?" Wade's face flushed. "Based on my training and observation. That card doesn't look like it matches someone like you." There it was. The thing that had been hanging in the air between them since he'd walked out of that store. "Someone like you." "Someone like me," Quincy repeated slowly. "What exactly does that mean?" "I didn't mean—" Wade stammered, realizing too late that he'd stepped into territory his training hadn't fully prepared him for. "I just meant that the card is corporate and you're driving a regular vehicle and I'm black," Quincy finished for him. "That's what you meant to say, isn't it? Someone like me, a black woman, couldn't possibly have legitimate access to a corporate card." "That's not what I said." "But it's what you meant." The gas pump clicked off. $47.23. Quincy removed the nozzle and replaced it in the cradle with deliberate precision. She turned to face Wade fully, and for the first time he saw something in her eyes that made him take an involuntary step back. It wasn't fear. It wasn't guilt. It was the cold professional assessment of someone who had looked at crime scenes and criminals and had learned to see through surfaces to the rot beneath. "I'm going to get my identification," Quincy said clearly. "It's in my vehicle. My badge and my police identification. When I show them to you, this conversation is going to be over, and you're going to walk back into that store and think very carefully about what just happened here." She moved toward her car door. Wade's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. Everything that happened next occurred in the space of 3 heartbeats. 1. Quincy's body reacted with 9 years of defensive training turning into the grab, her free hand coming up to break the hold. 2. Wade, interpreting her movement as aggression, yanked harder and used his weight to slam her against the side of her vehicle. 3. Quincy's head connected with the car door with a sound that echoed across the parking lot like a gunshot. "Stop resisting," Wade shouted, his voice cracking with adrenaline and panic. "I'm not resisting." Quincy's voice was strained, her face pressed against the cold metal of her car. "You're assaulting me. I'm a police detective." "You're a liar and a thief." Wade had his full weight against her now, one hand pinning her arm behind her back, the other reaching for his cuffs. "I'm making a citizen's arrest for fraud and resisting—" "Get your hands off me!" Quincy's shout cut through the night. "I am Detective Quincy Chambers of the Metropolitan Police Department. You are committing assault." Across the parking lot, someone's phone camera came up. The red recording light glowed in the darkness. Then another phone. And another. Within 60 seconds, 4 people were recording the scene from different angles. Within 90 seconds, the first live stream went active on social media. Within 2 minutes, the video had been shared 17 times. The algorithm smelled blood and began to feed. Wade didn't notice. He was too focused on the woman beneath his hands who had stopped struggling and gone terrifyingly still. "Listen to me very carefully," Quincy said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "In my right pocket is my badge. My Metropolitan Police Department badge. You're going to let me go right now, or what happens next is going to destroy your life. You're just saying that because my badge number is 74321. My commanding officer is Captain Tyrone Blackwood. My precinct is downtown 4th Street. Call them, right now. Call them and ask them if Detective Quincy Chambers is one of their detectives." Something in her voice finally penetrated Wade's adrenaline-soaked brain. A cold finger of doubt traced its way down his spine. "You're lying," he said, but there was less certainty in it now. "Call them." Wade's hand fumbled for his radio. "Dispatch, I need you to verify. I need you to check if there's a Detective Quincy Chambers with the Metro PD." "Don't bother," Quincy said. "I'll show you a faster way." Her right hand, still free, moved slowly toward her coat pocket. Wade tensed, ready to slam her against the car again, but she simply pulled out her phone. "Voice command," she said clearly. "Call Captain Blackwood." The phone's screen lit up. The call connected. It rang once, twice. On the third ring, a deep voice answered. "Chambers, it's almost midnight. This better be good." "Captain," Quincy said, her voice shaking now with something that wasn't fear but pure distilled rage. "I need you to listen very carefully. I'm at the Apex gas station on Piedmont. I've just been assaulted and falsely accused of fraud by a security guard who refused to believe I'm a police detective. He has me pinned against my vehicle right now. There are witnesses recording this, and I need you to come here personally and explain to this man exactly how much trouble he's in." The silence on the other end of the line lasted 3 seconds. Then Captain Tyrone Blackwood's voice came through the speaker loud enough for Wade to hear every syllable, and it sounded like thunder rolling across a battlefield. "Tell me that security guard is not still touching you." "He is, sir." "Tell me you've identified yourself." "Multiple times, sir." "Tell me there are witnesses." "At least 4 recording on their phones, sir." Another pause. Then, "Do not move. Do not say another word. I'm 10 minutes away, and someone needs to call a lawyer for that security guard because his life as he knows it just ended." The line stayed connected. Captain Blackwood didn't hang up. He just started driving, and every few seconds his voice would rumble through the speaker. "Still there, Chambers?" "Yes, sir." "How are you holding up?" "I've been better, sir." Wade's hand had gone slack on her arm. He stood frozen, his face draining of color in the fluorescent lights. "Let her go." The voice came from behind him. One of the witnesses, a middle-aged white man in a business suit. "Man, whatever you think she did, that's not how you handle it. Let her go." "I was just—" Wade's voice cracked. "She was using a card that didn't—" "You profiled her," another voice said. A young black woman, phone still recording. "We all saw it. She told you she was a cop, and you didn't believe her because of what she looked like." "That's not—" "It's exactly what happened," the woman said. "And now everyone's going to see it." Wade finally released Quincy's arm. She straightened, slowly, turned to face him, and Wade saw her eyes, for the first time really saw them. They weren't the eyes of a criminal. They were the eyes of someone who had just been violated in the most fundamental way possible. They were the eyes of someone who would not forget. "You just assaulted a police detective," Quincy said quietly. "In front of multiple witnesses, on camera, because you assume that someone who looks like me couldn't possibly be telling the truth about who I am. I didn't know. You didn't want to know. I told you, multiple times, and you chose not to believe me." In the distance, sirens began to wail. Wade's face went from pale to green. "Those aren't for—" "Those are exactly for you," Quincy said. "Captain Blackwood called for backup. They're coming for you, not me." The first patrol car arrived 90 seconds later. Then another. Then a third. The gas station parking lot lit up with red and blue lights, turning the ordinary Thursday night into a scene from a nightmare. Captain Tyrone Blackwood arrived in his personal vehicle, a black SUV that rolled into the parking lot like a tank advancing on enemy territory. He was a large man, 6'4", built like someone who'd played college football and never quite let go of the training. His dark skin gleamed with sweat despite the cool night air, and his eyes found Quincy immediately. "Chambers," he said, his voice rough with concern. "You hurt?" "Bumped my head on the car when he slammed me into it," Quincy said. "But I'm okay, sir." Blackwood's jaw tightened. He turned to Wade, who had been surrounded by 3 patrol officers, and walked toward him with the slow, deliberate pace of someone who was using every ounce of self-control not to do something he'd regret. "You the security guard?" Blackwood's voice could have frozen lava. "Yes, sir. I'm Wade Montenegro. I work for—" "I don't care who you work for. I care that you put your hands on one of my detectives. I care that she identified herself multiple times and you chose not to believe her. I care that there are 4 videos currently going viral showing you committing assault and battery on a decorated police officer. I didn't know she was—" "She told you," Blackwood interrupted. "She told you and you didn't believe her. Why?" Wade's mouth opened and closed. No words came out. "Let me answer for you," Blackwood continued. "You didn't believe her because she's a black woman, and somewhere in that training you received someone taught you that black people using corporate cards are suspicious. Someone taught you to profile. Someone taught you to trust your prejudice over someone's direct statement about their identity. No, that's not—" "Don't lie to me, son. I've been in law enforcement for 26 years. I know racial profiling when I see it. And what you did tonight, that wasn't protecting anything. That was persecution." Blackwood turned to the patrol officers. "I want him arrested. Assault and battery, false imprisonment, civil rights violations. I want every charge that applies." One of the officers stepped forward with handcuffs. "Sir, you have the right to remain silent." As Wade was read his Miranda rights, his face crumpling into the realization that this was real, that this was happening. Quincy stood by her vehicle and watched. Her hands were shaking. The adrenaline was finally wearing off, and in its place came the full weight of what had just occurred. She'd been profiled, assaulted, disbelieved, humiliated. On camera, for the world to see. Captain Blackwood appeared at her elbow. "Ambulance is on the way. You're getting checked out." "I'm fine." "That's not a suggestion, Chambers. You hit your head. Protocol." Quincy nodded slowly. She watched as Wade was placed in the back of a patrol car, his security uniform somehow looking more like a costume, now a prop in a play he'd never understood he was performing. "Sir," Quincy said quietly, "this is going to be a thing, isn't it?" Blackwood followed her gaze to the phone still recording. "Yeah," he said. "This is going to be a thing." He was right. By the time the ambulance arrived, the video had been shared over 3,000 times. By the time Quincy was cleared by the paramedics' minor contusion, no concussion cleared to go home, it had reached 50,000. By the time she finally collapsed into her bed at 3 a.m., unable to sleep, despite her exhaustion, the video had been viewed by over 2 million people, and the world had begun to watch. The thing about viral videos is that they don't ask permission. They don't wait for you to be ready. They simply explode across the digital landscape like wildfire, consuming everything in their path and leaving nothing unchanged. Quincy woke up 6 hours later to 347 text messages, 89 missed calls, and a news van parked outside her townhouse. The story had grown legs, it had grown wings, it had grown teeth, and it wasn't just about one security guard anymore. It was about every black person who'd ever been followed in a store. Every brown-skinned customer who'd been asked for extra identification. Every person of color who'd been told in 1,000 subtle and not-so-subtle ways that they didn't belong. The video was titled, "Security Guard Assaults Black Detective, Her Response Will Shock You." But what would truly shock the world wasn't what happened that night at the gas station. It was what came next. Quincy stood at her living room window, coffee mug trembling in her hands, watching the news van's satellite dish extend toward the sky like an accusing finger. Her phone buzzed again and again. She'd stopped counting after the first 100 notifications. The doorbell rang, then knocked, then rang again. "Detective Chambers, Channel 5 News. We'd love to get your statement." She closed her eyes and let the blinds fall shut. This wasn't how Thursday nights were supposed to end. This wasn't how Friday mornings were supposed to begin. She was supposed to be sleeping in, maybe doing laundry, definitely not hiding in her own home, while the world dissected the worst moment of her life in high definition. Her phone lit up again. This time it was Captain Blackwood. "Don't answer the door." His voice was firm when she picked up. "Don't make any statements. The department's legal team is handling press inquiries. You're on administrative leave effective immediately." "Administrative leave?" Quincy's voice cracked. "Sir, I didn't do anything wrong." "I know that. You know that. But this is protocol when an officer is involved in an incident that goes viral. It's for your protection, Chambers. The media circus is just getting started and you need to be away from it." "I need to work. I need to—" "What you need," Blackwood interrupted gently, "is to let us handle this. There's already an internal affairs review opening. Not because we think you did anything wrong, but because Wade Montenegro is claiming excessive force during his arrest." Quincy laughed a bitter sound. "He's claiming what?" "His lawyer showed up at booking around 4 a.m. They're spinning this as a misunderstanding that escalated because my response was disproportionate. They're saying you used your position to intimidate a civilian doing his job." The coffee mug hit the counter harder than Quincy intended. "He assaulted me. On camera. In front of witnesses. I know, and that's why you're going to win this. But right now the story is evolving, and we need to control the narrative. Stay home. Stay quiet. Let the system work." After he hung up, Quincy stood in her kitchen and felt the walls closing in. The system. The same system that had just put her on leave while Wade Montenegro probably slept comfortably in his own bed after posting bail. The same system that would now pick apart every second of that gas station encounter, looking for anything she might have done wrong. Her phone buzzed with a text from her younger sister Maya. "I saw the video. Are you okay? Mom's freaking out. Call us." Then one from her partner at work, Detective Marcus Webb. "Whole precinct's talking about it. Everyone's got your back. Let me know if you need anything." Then one from a number she didn't recognize. "You lying," expletive. "You probably attacked that guard first. People like you always play victim." She deleted it without reading the rest. But 3 more appeared within seconds. Then 5 more. Then a dozen. The hate was pouring in as fast as the support. Quincy turned off her phone and sat in the silence of her townhouse, listening to the muffled voices of reporters outside, and tried to remember what normal felt like. Across the city in a cramped apartment in East Point, Wade Montenegro sat on his second-hand couch and watched his life disintegrate in real time. The video was everywhere. On every news channel, every social media platform, every website. And in every version, he was the villain. The racist security guard, the aggressor. The man who'd assaulted a decorated police detective because he couldn't see past the color of her skin. His phone rang. It was his mother calling for the 7th time that morning. "Wade, please, you have to talk to me. What happened? The news is saying terrible things and I don't understand." "Mom, I can't. My lawyer said not to talk to anyone." "I'm not anyone. I'm your mother." Her voice broke. "They're saying you hurt someone. They're saying you're a racist. Tell me that's not true." Wade closed his eyes. "I didn't mean to hurt her. I thought she was committing fraud. My training said—" "Your training said to attack a woman." "No, I didn't attack her. She was resisting and I was trying to detain her and—" "She was a police officer, Wade. She told you that." I didn't believe her. The words came out as a whisper. I thought she was lying. The silence on the other end of the line was worse than any accusation. Why? His mother finally asked. Why didn't you believe her? Wade couldn't answer. Because the truth was sitting in his chest like a stone, and he didn't want to pull it out and examine it in the light. He'd made assumptions. He'd seen a black woman with a corporate card and an average car, and his training had taught him that those pieces didn't fit together, that inconsistency meant fraud, that his instincts were more reliable than her words. His training had taught him to be suspicious of people who looked like Detective Quincy Chambers. I have to go, Mom. He hung up and stared at his phone. The Sentinel Security Solutions app was open, showing his schedule. He was supposed to work tonight. Another solo shift, another chance to prove himself. The app refreshed. His schedule disappeared. A message appeared instead. Your employment has been terminated effective immediately. Please return all company property to the main office by 5 p.m. today. Fired. Just like that. Wade opened his email. There was already a message from the company's legal department. As per your employment contract section 7.3. Sentinel Security Solutions reserves the right to terminate employment without cause during the probationary period. Your actions on September 28th have resulted in significant reputational damage to the company. This termination is final and non-negotiable. He read it 3 times each word, driving deeper into his understanding of how thoroughly he'd destroyed his own life. But at the Sentinel Security Solutions corporate headquarters in Birmingham, Alabama, the executives weren't worried about Wade Montenegro. They were worried about discovery. In a conference room on the 14th floor, 6 lawyers and 4 executives gathered around a table covered in documents. At the head of the table sat Richard Vance, the company's CEO and founder. Gentlemen, Vance's voice was ice. We have a problem, and I'm not talking about the security guard. I'm talking about what's in our training materials. The chief legal counsel, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Reeves, opened a folder. Our standard training program includes a module called Risk Assessment and Customer Profiling. In it, we teach guards to identify high-risk customers based on appearance behavior and transaction patterns. That's standard industry practice, one executive protested. It is, Reeves agreed. Until you read the examples we use. She pulled out a sheet and began reading. Example 1. A customer in urban streetwear attempting to purchase high-value gift cards should trigger additional verification. Example 2. Multiple individuals of similar demographic entering separately but congregating inside the store warrant elevated monitoring. Example 3. A customer whose appearance doesn't match the typical profile for the neighborhood or transaction type should be approached for identification verification. The room went quiet. Those examples, Reeves continued, are textbook racial profiling. We never explicitly mention race, but the coding is obvious. Urban streetwear, similar demographic, doesn't match the typical profile. Every one of these examples describes behavior patterns that overwhelmingly apply to minority customers. That's not what we intended, another executive started. Intent doesn't matter. Reeves cut him off. Impact does, and the impact is that we've been training our guards for 6 years to profile customers based on race. Wade Montenegro did exactly what we taught him to do. He saw a black woman with a corporate card, decided she didn't fit the profile, and acted on that training. Vance leaned forward. Can we prove he didn't follow protocol? No, because he did follow protocol. Our protocol. That's the problem. Then we need to distance ourselves from him immediately. Put out a statement saying his actions violated company policy, that we don't tolerate discrimination, that we're cooperating fully with the investigation. That won't work, Reeves interrupted. Because if there's a civil lawsuit, and there will be discovery, we'll uncover these training materials. Detective Chambers' lawyers will subpoena everything. Every training manual, every email, every memo about risk assessment. And when they find this, she tapped the folder, We won't just be liable for one guard's actions. We'll be liable for systematic company-wide racial profiling. The silence that followed was broken only by the hum of the air conditioning. How bad are we talking? Vance's voice had lost its ice. Now it just sounded tired. Worst-case federal civil rights investigation. Class action lawsuit from every minority customer who's ever been profiled by one of our guards. Complete loss of contracts with every major client. Bankruptcy within 18 months. Best case. We settle quickly with Detective Chambers, revamp our entire training program, cooperate with investigators, and pray the story dies before anyone digs deeper. Vance looked around the table at the faces of men who'd built a $50 million company on the backs of minimum wage security guards and corporate contracts. Get ahead of this. I want our lawyers talking to her lawyers today. Whatever she wants, we pay it. I want this buried. But Detective Quincy Chambers wasn't interested in money. Not yet. By Friday afternoon, she'd hired her own lawyer. Not a police union attorney, but a civil rights lawyer named Jasmine Cole, who'd made her reputation dismantling discriminatory corporate policies. Cole had watched the video exactly once before calling Quincy directly. Detective Chambers, I'm not interested in a quick settlement. I'm interested in making sure this never happens to anyone else. Are you with me? Quincy, sitting in her darkened living room with her phone finally turned back on, felt something shift in her chest. What do you need from me? Everything. Every detail of that night. Every word that was said. Every moment before the video started. And I need you to be ready for this to get worse before it gets better. Because if we do this right, we're not going after one security guard. We're going after the company that trained him to see you as suspicious. How do we do that? Discovery. We file a lawsuit not just for assault, but for systematic racial discrimination. We demand access to their training materials, their hiring practices, their incident reports. We find out if this is an isolated case or a pattern. And if it's a pattern, then it's not about me anymore, Quincy finished. Exactly. It's about every person of color who's ever been followed in a store, questioned at a gas station, profiled because someone decided they didn't fit. This could be bigger than one night, detective. This could change policy. Quincy thought about the messages on her phone. The hate and the hope tangled together like barbed wire. She thought about Wade Montenegro, who was probably in his own apartment right now trying to figure out how his life had fallen apart so quickly. She thought about the training that had taught him to see her as a threat. I'm in, she said. Whatever it takes. Good. Because Sentinel Security just reached out to offer you a settlement. $500,000 and a non-disclosure agreement. They want you to sign it by Monday. And if I don't sign, then we go to war. And trust me, detective, they don't want that war. Cole was right. By Saturday morning, the story had evolved beyond a single viral video. Investigative journalists had started digging into Sentinel Security Solutions' history. They found incident reports from other locations, other cities, other guards. Patterns emerged like bones from excavated ground. A security guard in Mobile who'd called the police on a black teenager buying snacks with a $100 bill. A guard in Nashville who'd physically removed a Latino family from a convenience store for loitering while they waited for their food order. A guard in Charlotte who'd held a black businessman at gunpoint, convinced his luxury watch was stolen. Every case had been quietly settled. Every complainant had signed an NDA. Every story had been buried. Until now. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution ran a front-page story on Sunday morning. Security firm's training program, under fire documents. Suggest systematic racial profiling. Someone had leaked the training materials. Not the full manual, but enough excerpts to show the pattern. The coded language. The examples that always seem to target people of color. Sentinel Security's stock price dropped 14% before trading was suspended. By Monday morning, 3 more victims had come forward with their own stories. A civil rights organization filed a formal complaint with the Department of Justice. 2 senators called for a federal investigation. And Detective Quincy Chambers sat in Jasmine Cole's office watching her lawyer present their counteroffer to Sentinel Security's legal team via video conference. "My client is not interested in money," Cole said, her voice sharp as broken glass. "She's interested in change. So, here's what we want. 1. A complete overhaul of your training program, reviewed and approved by an independent civil rights organization. 2. A public apology admitting that your training materials promoted racial profiling. 3. The establishment of a $10 million fund to compensate victims of profiling by your guards nationwide. 4. The termination of any executive or trainer involved in creating these materials." The lawyer on the screen looked like he'd swallowed glass. "Ms. Cole, that's not a settlement offer. That's a corporate execution." "No," Cole smiled. "A corporate execution would be what happens when we go to trial win, and the jury awards punitive damages that bankrupt your company entirely. This is mercy. Take it. We need time to... You have 24 hours. After that, we file suit and everything becomes public record, including the full training manual that your whistleblower is prepared to hand over." The screen went dark. Cole turned to Quincy. "They'll take it. They have no choice." The whistleblower angle terrified them. "Do we actually have a whistleblower?" Quincy asked. Cole's smile widened. "We do now. A former trainer contacted me yesterday. He's been carrying guilt about those materials for 3 years, and your video gave him the courage to come forward. He's got emails, drafts internal memos discussing how to write the training manual so it wouldn't explicitly mention race, but would still teach guards to profile. It's damning." Quincy leaned back in her chair, feeling the weight of everything that had happened since Thursday night. A week ago, she'd been a detective with a clean record and a quiet life. Now she was the face of a movement she'd never asked to lead. "What happens to Wade Montenegro in all this?" she asked quietly. Cole's expression softened slightly. "That's up to you. We can push for prosecution, or we can let it go. Personally, I think he's just a kid who was taught wrong. The real criminals are the ones who did the teaching." Quincy thought about Wade's face in that parking lot. The confusion, the fear, the dawning realization that he'd made a terrible mistake. He wasn't evil. He was just ignorant, and that ignorance had been weaponized by people who knew exactly what they were doing. "I want him to face consequences," Quincy said slowly. "But I don't want to destroy him. Make it part of the settlement. Charges reduced to misdemeanor assault, probation, mandatory bias training. He made a mistake. Let him learn from it." Cole nodded. "You're more forgiving than most people would be." "I'm not forgiving him. I'm refusing to let hate turn me into something I'm not." Outside Cole's office, the city moved on with its Monday morning. Traffic crawled, coffee shops filled. People went to work and school and complained about ordinary things. But nothing was ordinary anymore. The video had been viewed 47 million times. It had sparked protests in 12 cities. It had launched 3 federal investigations. It had become a hashtag, a rallying cry, a mirror held up to a society that preferred to look away. And at the center of it all was a tired detective who just wanted to pump gas and go home, who'd been turned into a symbol by circumstances beyond her control, who was learning that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is refuse to be silent when the world tells you to disappear. Quincy's phone buzzed. A text from Captain Blackwood. "Sentinel's CEO just called the commissioner. They're ready to talk settlement. You're winning this." She stared at the message for a long moment. Winning. As if justice could be measured in dollars and policy changes. As if the feeling of Wade Montenegro's hand on her wrist slamming her into cold metal could be erased by apologies and training reforms. But maybe winning wasn't about erasure. Maybe it was about transformation. Taking pain and turning it into purpose. Taking violation and turning it into vindication for everyone who'd suffered in silence. Maybe winning was deciding that one bad night wouldn't define her, but what she did with that night could define what came next. She texted back, It's not about winning, sir. It's about making sure losing isn't an option for the next person. Across town, Wade Montenegro sat in a mandatory counseling session required by his bail conditions, listening to a therapist ask him questions he didn't want to answer. When you saw Detective Chambers at that gas station, what was your first thought? Wade stared at his hands. That something didn't fit. What didn't fit? She looked ordinary. And the card looked corporate. And my training said, Your training said what, Wade? He finally looked up and there were tears in his eyes. It said to trust my instincts, that inconsistencies mean fraud, that people who don't match their transactions are suspicious. Did it ever occur to you that an ordinary-looking black woman could legitimately have a corporate card? Wade's voice broke. I don't know. Maybe. But the training showed examples and they were always about people who looked like her, and I thought I was doing my job. You thought your job was to assume black people are criminals until proven otherwise. No, that's not what I thought. I wasn't thinking about race. I was just looking at the situation. Wade, the therapist interrupted gently. The fact that you weren't consciously thinking about race is part of the problem. Your training taught you to look at certain situations as suspicious. But those situations were always defined by race, even if the training manual never said the word. You internalized bias without realizing you were learning it. Wade put his head in his hands. I ruined someone's life. You hurt someone. Deeply. And yes, you've caused harm that can't be undone. But her life isn't ruined. Yours might feel like it is right now, but it doesn't have to be. The question is, what are you going to do with this? Are you going to defend your actions and blame your training? Or are you going to own what you did and become someone different? Wade didn't answer. He wasn't sure he could. But somewhere between that gas station parking lot and this counselor's office, something had cracked open inside him. The certainty that he'd been right, that he'd been doing his job, that he'd been following protocol, all of it had shattered like glass. And in the wreckage, he was forced to see himself clearly for the first time. It wasn't a comfortable view. The week crawled forward. Wednesday brought news that the Department of Justice had officially opened an investigation into Sentinel Security Solutions. Thursday brought the resignation of 3 executives. Friday brought the settlement agreement signed and delivered. Sentinel Security Solutions agreed to every demand. $10 million for victims, complete training overhaul, public apology, corporate restructuring. And Wade Montenegro accepted a plea deal: misdemeanor assault, 2 years probation, 200 hours of community service, mandatory completion of a comprehensive bias education program. The judge who accepted his plea looked at him sternly from the bench. Mr. Montenegro, you're young. You made a terrible mistake, but you're being given a chance that many people don't get the chance to learn from that mistake without it destroying your entire future. Don't waste it. I won't, Your Honor, Wade whispered. In the back of the courtroom, Quincy sat and watched. She'd insisted on being there, much to her lawyer's concern. But she needed to see this through to the end. Needed to look at the man who'd hurt her and decide whether she believed in redemption. When it was over, Wade walked past her row on his way out. Their eyes met for just a second. He mouthed 2 words, I'm sorry. She didn't respond, didn't nod, didn't acknowledge it. Because sorry wasn't enough. Sorry would never be enough. But it was a start. Outside the courthouse, autumn sunlight cut through the October air with a sharpness that matched Quincy's mood. She stood on the steps watching Wade Montenegro disappear into a waiting car with his mother, and felt none of the satisfaction she'd expected. Justice had been served technically. Papers had been signed. Deals had been made. The system had worked, everyone kept saying. But the system working felt a lot like swallowing broken glass and calling it medicine. Detective Chambers. A reporter surged forward with a microphone. How do you feel about the plea deal? Do you think Montenegro got off too easy? Quincy's lawyer, Jasmine Cole, stepped between them smoothly. My client has no comment at this time. All statements will be released through official channels. But another reporter called out, "What about Sentinel Security? Are you satisfied with the settlement?" And another, "Will you be returning to active duty?" And another, "Do you consider yourself an activist now?" The questions piled on top of each other like bodies in a mass grave, and Quincy felt her chest tighten. She pushed through the crowd toward Cole's car, feeling hands reaching cameras, flashing voices demanding pieces of her she didn't have left to give. Once inside, the vehicle door closed against the circus outside. Quincy let her head fall back against the seat. "I can't keep doing this." Cole pulled into traffic with the practiced ease of someone used to escaping media scrums. "You won't have to much longer. The settlement includes a provision that Sentinel can't contact you or use your name in any of their rebranding efforts. You're free to move on." "Move on," Quincy repeated hollowly. "To what? I've been on leave for 3 weeks. Internal Affairs cleared me, but the commissioner won't let me back on active duty until the media attention dies down. My face is on every news channel. I can't go to the grocery store without someone either asking for a selfie or calling me a race baiter. How exactly do I move on from that?" Cole was quiet for a moment, navigating through downtown Atlanta's midday traffic. "You know what the worst part of winning is? Everyone expects you to be grateful. They expect you to smile and say thank you, and act like you've been healed by the process. But trauma doesn't work that way. Justice doesn't erase what happened to you." "Then what does—" Quincy's voice cracked. "Because I'm drowning here, Jasmine. I'm drowning and everyone keeps congratulating me for learning to swim. You survive it, one day at a time, and eventually you figure out how to use what happened to you as something other than a weight around your neck." Cole glanced over. "There are people who want to meet you, other victims from the Sentinel cases. They've been reaching out through my office asking if you'd be willing to talk to them. Some of them never got justice. Their cases were settled and buried. But now that the company's under investigation, they're feeling brave enough to speak up again." Quincy stared out the window at the city sliding past. "What would I even say to them? That they're not alone. That what happened to them mattered. That someone saw their pain and believed them." Cole pulled up to a stoplight and turned to face Quincy directly. "Look, I know you didn't ask to be a symbol. I know you just wanted to pump gas and go home. But whether you like it or not, you've become something bigger than one bad night. You're proof that fighting back isn't futile. These people need to see that." The light turned green. Cole drove on, and Quincy sat with the weight of expectation pressing down on her shoulders like a physical thing. That evening, she agreed to meet 3 of them. They gathered in a private room at Cole's law office, a space designed for confidential conversations. Quincy arrived early and sat alone watching the door, feeling like an imposter in her own story. The first to arrive was Marcus Jennings, a 41-year-old black businessman from Mobile. He wore an expensive suit that somehow made him look more vulnerable rather than less. When he saw Quincy, his eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "I'm sorry, I didn't think I'd react like this. It's just seeing you in person. You're real. This whole time watching your video following your case, I kept thinking maybe it wasn't real. Maybe I imagined what happened to me too." Quincy stood and shook his hand. "What happened to you was real, Mr. Jennings. Tell me about it." He sat down heavily, hands shaking. 2 years ago, I was at a Sentinel-guarded jewelry store buying an anniversary present for my wife. 25th anniversary. I picked out this beautiful necklace paid with my credit card. But the security guard, he kept watching me, kept hovering, finally accused me of using a stolen card. He called the police. I was handcuffed in front of the whole store, in front of my wife who'd come in to surprise me. "Did they arrest you?" "No, my card went through fine. The police apologized, but the damage was done. Everyone in that store watched me get cuffed and assumed I was a criminal. The video spread through our community. My business lost 3 major contracts because clients decided I wasn't trustworthy anymore." His voice broke. I settled with Sentinel for $75,000 and an NDA. They made it go away. Except it never went away. I see it every time someone looks at me differently. Every time I second-guess whether I should use my own credit card in public. The second person arrived before Quincy could respond. Rosa Martinez, a 36-year-old Latina mother from Nashville who'd been removed from a convenience store for loitering while waiting for her online order. Her 3 children had watched as the Sentinel guard physically escorted her out, accusing her of trespassing. "They made my babies cry," Rosa said, her accent thick with emotion. "My son, he was 7. He asked me why the man said we were bad people. How do you explain racism to a 7-year-old? How do you tell him that some people will look at us and see criminals instead of customers?" The third arrival was unexpected. David Chen, a 19-year-old college student from Charlotte who walked with a slight limp. He looked at Quincy with old eyes and a young face. "The guard pulled a gun on me," he said quietly, before anyone could ask. "I was walking through the parking lot to my car after buying energy drinks for an all-night study session. He thought I was stealing a car. My car. The one my parents gave me for graduation. He put a gun to my head and made me lie on the ground while he called the police." "Jesus," Quincy breathed. "The police came and cleared it up. But I still dream about that gun. About how easy it would have been for him to pull the trigger. About how my parents would have had to identify my body over a Red Bull and some chips." David's hands clenched. "Sentinel paid my medical bills. I dislocated my shoulder when he threw me down and gave me $50,000 to shut up. I was 18. I took it because I thought that was justice. But it wasn't. It was just silence." They sat together in that room, 4 people connected by the same corporation's systematic failure to see them as human beings. And Quincy realized that Cole had been right. This was bigger than one security guard at one gas station. This was a pattern, a policy, a poison that had infected an entire company culture. "We're filing a class action lawsuit," Cole announced, entering the room with a folder thick with documents. "Thanks to the whistleblower from Sentinel's training department, we now have evidence of over 200 incidents across 17 states where Sentinel guards engaged in profiling. Some cases were settled. Some were just buried in incident reports. But every single one follows the same pattern: minority customers targeted based on appearance, not behavior." 200, Rosa repeated numbly. 200 families like mine. "At least. Those are just the ones we've found so far. The federal investigation is ongoing, and they're finding more every day." Cole spread documents across the table. "Here's what we're proposing: a class action suit for systematic civil rights violations. We're not going after individual guards. We're going after the corporation that trained them, the executives who approved those training materials, and the culture that allowed this to happen for over 6 years." Marcus leaned forward. "What do you need from us?" "Your stories, your courage, your willingness to break those NDAs and testify about what happened. Sentinel will fight back hard. They'll try to discredit you, claim you're lying for money, drag your personal lives through the mud. It's going to be brutal. More brutal than being handcuffed in front of my wife." Marcus's voice was steel. "More brutal than my children learning to fear security guards," Rosa added. "More brutal than having a gun to my head," David finished. Cole smiled grimly. "Then we have a case." Quincy listened to them volunteer themselves for another round of trauma, another public dissection of their worst moments, and felt something shift inside her chest. These people weren't asking to be symbols either. They were just tired of being silent. "I'm in," Quincy said. "Whatever you need me to do. Testify, speak publicly, break my own settlement terms if necessary. I'm in." Cole's smile widened. "I was hoping you'd say that. Because we need a lead plaintiff. Someone whose case is so clear, so documented, so impossible to dismiss that it anchors the entire lawsuit. That's you, Detective. You're our foundation." The weight of expectation pressed down again, but this time Quincy felt strong enough to carry it. Over the next month, the case grew like a living thing. More victims came forward. The Department of Justice expanded their investigation. Internal documents leaked, showing that Sentinel's executives had known about the profiling issues for years but had buried complaints to protect their contracts. One leaked email sent from the CEO Richard Vance to his training director became the smoking gun. I don't care how we phrase it in the manual, but our guards need to understand that certain demographics are higher risk. We can't afford to be politically correct when there's theft to prevent. Just make sure the language is legally defensible. The news cycle exploded again. Sentinel's remaining contracts began to dissolve. Walmart dropped them. Target dropped them. Every major retailer that had used their services suddenly discovered urgent needs to reevaluate security partnerships. Quincy watched the corporate collapse from her living room, still on administrative leave, still waiting for clearance to return to work. Captain Blackwood called every few days with updates. "The commissioner is getting pressure from city council," he told her in late October. "They want you back on duty. They want to show the public that the department supports you. But they also want you to do a press conference first. Talk about resilience and justice and how the system works." "The system doesn't work," Quincy said flatly. "The system protected Sentinel for 6 years. The system put me on leave while they investigated whether I'd done something wrong. The system only started working when the video went viral, and they had no choice. I know that. You know that. But the commissioner needs a narrative that doesn't make the department look bad. Then the commissioner can write his own narrative. I'm done being anyone's prop." Blackwood sighed. "Chambers, I'm on your side. I've been on your side since minute one. But you're playing a dangerous game here. The department can help your career, or they can make it very difficult for you to move forward." "Are you threatening me, sir?" "I'm warning you. There's a difference." Quincy ended the call feeling hollower than before. Even her allies wanted her to perform, to smile, to make everyone comfortable with her trauma. But comfort was the enemy of change, and she was done making people comfortable. The class action lawsuit was filed on November 3rd, exactly 5 weeks after the gas station incident. It named Sentinel Security Solutions CEO Richard Vance and 7 other executives as defendants. It represented 243 plaintiffs across 17 states. It sought $500 million in damages. The press conference announcing the lawsuit was held outside the federal courthouse in Atlanta. Quincy stood at the podium with Jasmine Cole flanked by Marcus Rosa David and a dozen other plaintiffs who'd chosen to show their faces publicly. "We are here today," Cole began, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd of reporters, supporters, and curious onlookers. "Because a corporation chose profit over people. Because a training program taught fear instead of fairness. Because 243 human beings were treated like criminals for the crime of existing, while black, or brown, or simply different." She gestured to Quincy. Detective Chambers' case went viral because someone filmed it. But for every video that makes the news, there are hundreds of incidents that happen in the dark. People who are profiled, harassed, assaulted, and then silenced by settlements and NDAs. Today we break that silence. Today we demand accountability. Today we tell Sentinel Security and every corporation like them, you can't buy our dignity and you can't bury the truth. The crowd erupted in applause. Quincy stepped to the microphone, her prepared speech suddenly feeling inadequate in her pocket. She spoke from the heart instead. 5 weeks ago, I stopped at a gas station to fuel my car after a long shift. I was tired. I was thinking about going home, maybe watching some TV, definitely going to sleep. I wasn't thinking about racism or justice or corporate policy. I was just thinking about my bed. Scattered laughter rippled through the crowd. But Wade Montenegro saw something else when he looked at me. He saw a threat, a fraud, a criminal. Not because of anything I did, but because of what I looked like. And he'd been trained to see me that way. Trained by Sentinel Security Solutions. Trained by materials that taught him to trust his bias instead of my words. Her voice strengthened. What happened to me was wrong. But what happened to Marcus Jennings, to Rosa Martinez, to David Chen, to 240 other people, that's not wrong. That's systematic. That's intentional. That's a company choosing to weaponize prejudice for profit. She looked directly into the cameras. I'm a police detective. I'm supposed to represent justice and fairness. But I learned something important that night. Justice isn't given. It's fought for. It's demanded. It's earned through courage and persistence, and refusing to accept that this is just how things are. So today we fight. We fight for everyone who's been profiled. We fight for everyone who's been made to feel like they don't belong in a space they have every right to occupy. We fight so that maybe someday someone can stop at a gas station and just pump their gas without wondering if today is the day someone decides they look suspicious. The applause was thunderous, but Quincy barely heard it. She was looking at Rose's children standing off to the side with their father. The 7-year-old was holding a sign he'd made himself, "My mom is a hero." That night, Quincy slept deeply for the first time in weeks. Not because the fight was over, it was just beginning, but because she'd finally figured out what she was fighting for. The next morning brought news that Sentinel Security Solutions had filed for bankruptcy protection. Their stock had become worthless. Their CEO had resigned. Their training director had been arrested on federal civil rights charges. The empire was falling. And in its ruins, something new was beginning to grow. Quincy's phone rang. It was Captain Blackwood. "The commissioner wants you back," he said without preamble. "Active duty effective immediately. No press conference required. You've done enough." What changed? City Council saw the lawsuit numbers. 243 plaintiffs. 500 million in damages. They did the math. You're not a liability anymore, Chambers. You're an asset. They want to show the city that the department stands with you. Better late than never, I suppose. I know it's not ideal, but it's something. And honestly, I've missed having you on my team. When can you start? Quincy looked around her townhouse. The place she'd been hiding for 5 weeks. The cave she'd retreated into while the world raged outside. "Tomorrow," she said. "I start tomorrow." And because she was done hiding. Done waiting for permission to reclaim her life. Done letting other people decide what justice looked like. She was Detective Quincy Chambers, and she had work to do. Walking back into the precinct felt like stepping through a doorway into a parallel universe where everything looked the same, but nothing felt right. The same fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The same coffee maker gurgled in the corner, brewing the same terrible coffee. The same desks sat in the same positions covered with the same piles of case files and abandoned coffee cups. But Quincy wasn't the same person who'd left 5 weeks ago. Her partner, Detective Marcus Webb, looked up from his computer and broke into a grin that split his face. "Chambers, you're back. Please tell me you brought better coffee because this sludge has been killing me." The familiarity of his greeting made something loosen in Quincy's chest. "I brought myself and my complete lack of patience for paperwork. That's all you're getting." Marcus rounded his desk and pulled her into a hug that lifted her slightly off the ground. He was a big man, 6'2", and built like someone who'd played college football, which he had. "Seriously though, it's good to have you back. This place has been weird without you." "Weird how?" He set her down and lowered his voice. "Everyone's been walking on eggshells. Nobody wants to talk about what happened, but nobody can talk about anything else. It's like the entire precinct has been holding its breath waiting to see if you'd come back." "Well, I'm here, breathing and everything." "I can see that." Marcus studied her face. "How are you really doing?" It was the question everyone had been asking for 5 weeks, and Quincy still didn't have a good answer. "I'm functional. That's the best I've got right now." "Functional works. Come on, Captain wants to see you before you settle in." Captain Blackwood's office hadn't changed either. Same cluttered desk, same photographs on the wall of his academy graduation and various commendations, same window overlooking the parking lot. But when Quincy entered, she noticed something new, a framed newspaper article on the wall, the headline reading, "Detective's Courage Sparks Corporate Reckoning." Blackwood caught her looking at it. "Thought you should see it every time you come in here. Reminder that what you went through mattered. Or a reminder that my worst moment is now public property." Both, probably. He gestured for her to sit. I wanted to talk to you before you jumped back in. Your caseload is manageable. I made sure of that. Webb's been covering most of your active cases, but the Thompson homicide is yours if you want it. Cold case needs fresh eyes. I want whatever's normal. I don't need special treatment. You're getting it anyway. Call it administrative discretion. Blackwood leaned back in his chair. Look, I know you're ready to prove you're fine and everything's back to normal. But it's not, and pretending otherwise helps nobody. You went through trauma. You're dealing with a massive lawsuit. You're in the national spotlight. That's not normal detective work, Chambers. Quincy felt her jaw tighten. So what do you want me to do? Take more leave, see a department shrink, stand in front of the precinct, and bare my soul. I want you to be honest, with yourself and with your team. If you're having a bad day, say so. If a case triggers something, speak up. If you need backup, ask for it. Being strong doesn't mean pretending you're bulletproof. The words hit harder than Quincy expected. She looked down at her hands, noticing they were clenched in her lap. I don't know how to be the detective who got assaulted on camera. I only know how to be the detective who solves cases and goes home. I need to be that person again. Then be her. But be her honestly. That's all I'm asking. Quincy nodded and stood. The Thompson case, I'll take it. Good. And Chambers, welcome back. We missed you. The Thompson case was exactly what she needed, a puzzle with clear edges and no emotional landmines. Robert Thompson, 53, found dead in his apartment 6 months ago. Initially ruled natural causes, but his daughter insisted something was wrong. Now new evidence suggested poisoning. Webb had been working it half-heartedly between other cases, but it deserved full attention. Quincy dove into the files with the single-minded focus she'd always used to escape whatever personal drama was happening in her life. The case was cleaner than her emotions, more logical than the lawsuit, more controllable than the media circus. For 8 hours, she was just a detective again. It felt like coming home. But at 3 in the afternoon, her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. Detective Chambers. This is Amanda Peters from the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. Do you have a moment to talk about the Sentinel security investigation? Quincy stepped into an empty conference room and closed the door. Of course. What do you need? We've expanded the investigation beyond Sentinel. We're looking at the entire private security industry now. Your case opened a door, and what we're finding behind it is extensive. I wanted to give you a heads up before it hits the news tomorrow. We're filing charges against 3 other security companies for similar training practices. This isn't just a Sentinel problem. It's an industry problem. The words settled over Quincy like weight. How many other companies? So far 3 with enough evidence to prosecute, but we're investigating 12 more. Detective Chambers, your case didn't just expose one bad corporation. It exposed a systematic failure across an entire industry. Companies have been training guards in racial profiling for decades, hiding behind coded language and plausible deniability. Quincy sat down heavily. Decades. At least. We're finding training materials from the 90s that use the same techniques. Different words, same intent. Urban youth. High-risk demographics. Suspicious presentation. It's all code for the same prejudice. Jesus! How many people? Conservatively thousands, maybe tens of thousands who've been profiled, harassed, or assaulted by guards trained in these methods. Most never reported it. Most who did report were settled into silence. You're one of the few who fought back, and that fight made it possible for us to look deeper. After Peters hung up, Quincy sat in the empty conference room and tried to process the magnitude of what she'd stumbled into. She'd just wanted justice for herself, but she'd accidentally kicked over a rock and revealed an entire ecosystem of rot beneath it. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jasmine Cole. Saw the DOJ news. You okay? Quincy texted back. Define okay. Fair. Dinner tonight, we need to talk strategy. Can't. Just got back to work. Trying to be normal. Normal is overrated. But I understand. Call me this weekend. Quincy returned to her desk and tried to focus on the Thompson case, but her mind kept drifting to Amanda Peters's words. Decades, thousands of people, an entire industry built on systematic profiling. Marcus noticed her distraction. You good? DOJ just expanded their investigation. 3 more companies getting charged. He whistled low. Damn, you really did kick a hornet's nest. I just wanted to pump gas, Marcus. I know. But sometimes the universe has bigger plans. He pulled up a chair. Listen, I've been thinking about this a lot. About what happened to you. And I realized something. I've been a cop for 12 years, and I've never once been questioned about my right to use my own credit card. Nobody's ever looked at me and assumed I was committing fraud. That's privilege, right? White privilege. I knew it existed theoretically, but watching what happened to you made it real in a way I couldn't ignore. Quincy looked at her partner with new appreciation. Most people don't want to examine their privilege. Most people are cowards, and I've been one of them for too long. So I've been doing research. Reading books about systemic racism, following activists on social media, actually listening instead of defending. It's uncomfortable as hell, but it's necessary. He leaned forward. What I'm trying to say is, I see you now. I see what you deal with that I don't. And I've got your back in ways I didn't even know I needed to before. Thank you, Quincy said quietly. That means more than you know. Just being honest. Also, I've been talking to some of the other white cops here about their own blind spots. Not everyone wants to hear it, but some do. Change starts small, right? Sometimes. Quincy agreed. And sometimes it starts with a viral video and a federal investigation. They worked in companionable silence for another hour until Captain Blackwood appeared at their desks. Chambers' web conference room, now. Inside, they found 2 FBI agents waiting. The taller one, a black woman in her 40s, extended her hand. Detective Chambers, I'm Special Agent Lisa Washington. This is Special Agent Tom Rivera. We're working with the DOJ on the Sentinel investigation, and we need your help with something sensitive. Quincy shook their hands warily. What kind of help? We have a witness who's ready to turn. Marcus Dalton, former VP of training at Sentinel. He's got evidence of knowledge that goes straight to the top. Emails, recordings, internal memos, showing the executives knew exactly what they were teaching and why. But he's terrified. He's already had his car keyed twice and received anonymous death threats. He wants to talk to you before he agrees to testify. Why me? Because you're real to him. You're not just a case number or a legal strategy. You're a person who suffered because of the training he helped create. He needs to face that before he can move forward. Quincy looked at Captain Blackwood, who nodded. It's your call, Chambers. No pressure either way. Where is he? Safe house in Decatur. We can take you there now if you're willing. 20 minutes later, Quincy sat across from Marcus Dalton in a nondescript townhouse with FBI agents stationed outside. Dalton was in his early 50s, gray at the temples, with the hunched shoulders of someone carrying crushing guilt. Thank you for coming. He said, his voice barely above a whisper. I know you have no reason to help me. I don't deserve your time or your forgiveness. I'm not here to forgive you, Quincy said bluntly. I'm here because the FBI says you have information that can take down the people responsible for training Wade Montenegro to see me as a threat. Is that true? Dalton nodded miserably. I have everything. 7 years of emails, recordings of training sessions, internal surveys showing we knew guards were profiling minorities, notes from executive meetings where we discussed how to teach prejudice without getting sued. He pulled out a laptop. I helped create the monster. I thought I was just doing my job. I don't know what I thought. That's a lie. I knew what I was doing. I just didn't care because it wasn't happening to me. Show me. For the next 2 hours, Dalton walked Quincy through a digital paper trail of corporate malfeasance. Email chains discussing how to phrase training materials to avoid legal liability while still achieving the desired filtering effect. Recordings of Richard Vance telling trainers to trust the statistics about minority crime rates. Internal memos calculating that settling profiling cases was cheaper than changing the training program. One email made Quincy's blood run cold. It was from Dalton himself, sent 3 years ago. The new diversity consultant is pushing back on our risk assessment module. She claims it's racially coded. Recommend we terminate her contract and find someone more aligned with our operational philosophy. That consultant? Quincy said quietly. What happened to her? We fired her, gave her a severance and an NDA. She tried to warn us, tried to tell us we were training people to discriminate, and I helped silence her. Dalton's hands shook. Her name was Dr. Patricia Hammond. She's a professor at Morehouse now. She's one of the experts the DOJ brought in to analyze our training materials. She remembered me, remembered what we did to her, and she still helped build the case that's going to destroy us. Quincy thought about Dr. Hammond trying to do the right thing and being punished for it, trying to prevent exactly what had happened in that gas station parking lot. You need to testify. All of this, she gestured at the laptop. It's damning, but a jury needs to hear it from you. They need to see someone from inside the machine willing to admit what it really was. I'm scared, Dalton admitted. These people have money and power. They'll come after me. They'll destroy what's left of my reputation. They'll do to you what they did to hundreds of people who just wanted to exist without being profiled. Quincy interrupted. The difference is you actually did something wrong. They didn't. So yeah, you should be scared. But you should be more scared of living with this guilt for the rest of your life. Dalton was quiet for a long moment. Will you be there when I testify? If it helps you tell the truth, yes. It does. Knowing you'll be watching will keep me honest. I owe you that much at least. Agent Washington stepped back into the room. Mr. Dalton, if you're ready to cooperate, we need to move quickly. The grand jury convenes next week. I'm ready, Dalton said, straightening his shoulders. Tell me what you need. On the drive back to the precinct, Agent Washington turned to Quincy. That took guts facing him like that. Most victims wouldn't want to be anywhere near someone who helped cause their trauma. I didn't do it for him, Quincy said. I did it for everyone else his training hurt. If he can help take down the people at the top, then his guilt is useful. Cold calculus. Justice isn't always warm. The news of Marcus Dalton's cooperation broke 2 days later. The headlines screamed, "Sentinel whistleblower exposes corporate cover-up," and "Training executive turns on former employer with damning evidence." Richard Vance, the CEO who'd already resigned, was arrested at his home in Birmingham. 3 other executives were charged with conspiracy to violate civil rights. The company's bankruptcy proceedings were suspended pending criminal investigation, and across the country, people who'd been profiled by Sentinel guards started coming forward in droves. The class action lawsuit grew to 412 plaintiffs, then 593, then 827. Each new name represented a story, a humiliation, a moment when someone was treated like a criminal for the crime of their skin color. Quincy read their stories late at night after her shifts, unable to sleep. A 15-year-old black girl accused of shoplifting because she was wearing a backpack in a store. A Middle Eastern man held at gunpoint because he was taking photos of architecture. A Native American woman forced to prove her credit card wasn't stolen because she was buying expensive electronics. The patterns were undeniable. The pain was universal. The system had failed all of them. But something else was happening too. The conversation was changing. Major retailers announced new partnerships with civil rights organizations to review their security protocols. 2 states passed laws requiring bias training for all private security guards. The International Association of Security Professionals published new ethical guidelines explicitly prohibiting racial profiling. Change was happening. Slowly, imperfectly, but happening. Quincy's phone rang late one Friday evening. It was Wade Montenegro. "Detective Chambers." His voice was hesitant. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I wanted you to know something. I've been going through the bias training as part of my probation, and today we had to watch your video. The full video from every angle. The instructor made us watch it over and over, analyzing every moment where I made a choice based on prejudice instead of evidence." Quincy said nothing, waiting. "I saw myself clearly for the first time," Wade continued. "Really saw what I did to you. Not what I thought I was doing, but what I actually did. And I realized something. Every moment I had a chance to listen to you, to believe you, to treat you like a human being, I chose not to. Because I'd been trained to trust my bias over your truth. That training destroyed both of us that night." "It destroyed you because you hurt someone," Quincy said quietly. "It destroyed me because I was hurt. Those aren't the same thing." "I know. I'm not trying to make this about me. I just wanted you to know that I'm not defending what I did anymore. I'm not blaming my training or my youth or my inexperience. I made choices that night, bad choices, racist choices, and I'm spending the rest of my life trying to become someone who would never make those choices again." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm testifying too, against Sentinel. The prosecution asked me to explain how the training worked, how it shaped my thinking. I agreed. And I wanted you to hear it from me first, not from some court filing." After he hung up, Quincy sat with the complexity of it all. Wade was both perpetrator and victim. He'd hurt her because he'd been taught to see her as dangerous. That didn't excuse what he'd done, but it explained the machinery of oppression that had turned a nervous young guard into a weapon. The real enemies were the people who'd built that machine, the executives who'd calculated that prejudice was profitable, the trainers who'd coded racism into curriculum, the system that had valued security contracts over human dignity. That was who needed to fall, and fall they would. The grand jury indicted all 7 executives on federal civil rights charges. The trial was scheduled for March, and Detective Quincy Chambers would be there to watch justice finally catch up with the people who'd made that Thursday night inevitable. But first, she had work to do. Cases to solve. A partner who needed her. A precinct that was slowly learning what it meant to confront its own biases. Normal, it turned out, wasn't about going back to who she'd been before. It was about becoming someone new. Someone who carried her scars visibly and refused to pretend they didn't matter. Someone who understood that justice wasn't a destination. It was a direction. And she was finally pointed the right way. Winter came to Atlanta with uncharacteristic mercy, bringing cool air instead of ice-gray skies instead of snow. Quincy watched the seasons change from her desk at the precinct, working cases that felt both monumentally important and refreshingly mundane. A domestic violence case that ended with the victim finally leaving. A robbery solved through old-fashioned detective work and a lucky break. A missing person found safe if not entirely sound. Normal work. Normal days. Except nothing felt entirely normal anymore. The trial date approached like a storm on the horizon, inevitable and electric. March 15th, United States versus Richard Vance et al. 7 executives facing federal civil rights conspiracy charges. Marcus Dalton ready to testify. Wade Montenegro prepared to explain how the training had shaped his thinking. And Detective Quincy Chambers scheduled to take the stand as the prosecution's star witness. 2 nights before the trial began, Quincy couldn't sleep. She stood at her kitchen window at 2 in the morning, drinking chamomile tea that did nothing to calm her nerves, and tried to imagine herself on that witness stand. Tried to imagine facing the lawyers who would attempt to discredit her, the defense attorneys who would suggest she'd overreacted, the jury who would decide whether her pain mattered enough to punish the people responsible. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus Webb. "Can't sleep either. Want company?" 20 minutes later, they sat in her living room with coffee instead of tea because pretending they'd sleep was pointless. "You ready for this?" Marcus asked. No. Yes. I don't know. Is anyone ever ready to have their trauma dissected in open court? Probably not. But you've got something most victims don't. You've got proof, video evidence, witnesses, a paper trail showing exactly how the system failed. That's powerful. It's also terrifying. What if the jury doesn't see it? What if they look at me and think I'm just an angry black woman playing the race card? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then they're exactly the problem you're fighting against. But I don't think that's going to happen. I've read the witness list. You've got Dr. Hammond, the diversity consultant they fired. You've got Dalton with all his evidence. You've got 400 other plaintiffs whose stories corroborate yours. The truth is on your side, Quincy. That has to count for something. Does it? Because from where I'm sitting, the truth has been on our side for 400 years, and look where that's gotten us. Fair point. But this time is different. This time the world is watching. The trial began on a cold March morning with reporters lined up around the federal courthouse like pilgrims at a shrine. Quincy arrived with Jasmine Cole and Captain Blackwood pushing through the crowd of cameras and questions. Inside the courtroom filled with plaintiffs, supporters, activists, and curious observers who'd been following the case since that first video went viral. The prosecution's opening statement was delivered by Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Park, a Korean-American woman whose family had emigrated from Seoul 30 years ago. She spoke with quiet authority about what the evidence would show: a deliberate, systematic effort to train security guards in racial profiling, disguised as risk assessment, motivated by profit, and sustained through intimidation and silence. The defense will tell you this case is about one security guard making a mistake, Park said, pacing in front of the jury. They'll say that Wade Montenegro acted alone, that his actions don't reflect corporate policy, that what happened to Detective Chambers was an unfortunate incident, but not a conspiracy. Don't believe them. The evidence will show you that Wade Montenegro did exactly what Sentinel Security Solutions trained him to do. He saw a black woman with a corporate card and decided she was suspicious. Not because of her behavior, not because of any actual evidence of fraud, but because his training taught him to trust racial stereotypes over human testimony. She turned to face the defendant's table, where 7 men in expensive suits sat with careful expressions. These men built a $50 million company by teaching prejudice and calling it security. They profited from discrimination and called it risk management. They destroyed lives and called it protocol. The evidence will prove that they knew exactly what they were doing, and they did it anyway. The defense's opening was delivered by Martin Cross, a silver-haired attorney famous for defending white-collar criminals. He painted a picture of misunderstood business practices, unfortunate misapplications of reasonable policies, and a rush to judgment fueled by social media outrage. "Ladies and gentlemen," Cross said smoothly, "this case is being prosecuted in the court of public opinion before it ever reached this courtroom. My clients are not monsters. They're businessmen who tried to help their clients prevent theft and fraud. Did some individual guards misapply that training? Perhaps, but that's not a crime. That's human error. And you cannot hold executives criminally liable for the independent actions of contract employees they never met and never supervised directly." Quincy watched from the gallery and felt her jaw clench. The defense strategy was clear: shift blame downward. Muddy the waters, make the jury doubt whether corporate policy could be held responsible for individual actions. It was elegant. It was effective. It was exactly what she'd expected. The prosecution spent the first week building their foundation. They called the 4 witnesses who'd recorded the gas station incident, who described what they saw and felt. They called the paramedic who'd examined Quincy's head injury. They called Captain Blackwood, who testified about Quincy's exemplary record and the immediate response to the assault. Then they called Dr. Patricia Hammond. Dr. Hammond was a 62-year-old black woman with silver locks and the bearing of someone who'd spent a lifetime fighting battles others preferred to ignore. She took the stand with calm dignity and explained her credentials: PhD in organizational psychology, 20 years consulting with corporations on diversity and inclusion, author of 3 books on unconscious bias. Dr. Hammond. Park began. Can you tell the jury about your relationship with Sentinel Security Solutions? I was hired in 2022 to review their training program and provide recommendations for improvement. I spent 3 months analyzing their materials, observing training sessions, and interviewing guards and trainers. At the end of that period, I submitted a report detailing significant problems with racial bias in their risk assessment curriculum. What did that report say? It said that while the training materials never explicitly mentioned race, they used coded language that would inevitably lead to racial profiling. Terms like urban streetwear, suspicious demographics, inconsistent presentation. These were all code words for racial and ethnic minorities. I recommended a complete overhaul of the program. What happened after you submitted that report? Dr. Hammond's expression hardened. I was fired. Not officially for the report's content, of course. They said it was budget constraints. But I received an email from Marcus Dalton, the VP of Training, thanking me for my work and suggesting I sign a non-disclosure agreement as part of my severance. When I refused, the severance offer was reduced significantly. Why did you refuse to sign the NDA? Because I knew what would happen if I stayed silent. I knew that guards trained in that program would profile people, would hurt people, would treat minorities as threats instead of customers. I couldn't take money to be quiet about that. The defense tried to discredit her on cross-examination, suggesting her report was biased, that she'd gone into the consultation looking for problems, that she'd exaggerated the issues to justify her fee. But Dr. Hammond remained unshakable. Sir, she said to Cross, during a particularly aggressive line of questioning, I have spent my entire career studying how bias operates in organizations. I know what coded language looks like. I know how prejudice gets dressed up in professional terminology. And I know the difference between a company that's trying to improve and a company that's trying to avoid liability. Sentinel was the latter. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The judge called for order, and Quincy felt something shift in the air. The jury was listening. Marcus Dalton testified in the second week. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the 6 months since Quincy had first met him. His voice shook as he walked the jury through email after email, recording after recording, showing how the executive team had deliberately crafted training materials to achieve racial profiling without explicitly mandating it. One email displayed on the courtroom screens became the turning point. It was from Richard Vance to the entire executive team. We need to be smart about this. The lawyers say we can't tell guards to profile by race. Fine. We don't use that word. But we make damn sure they understand that certain demographics are higher risk. Use statistics. Use euphemisms. Use whatever language keeps us out of court. But at the end of the day, our guards need to know who to watch. That's what clients pay us for. The courtroom was silent as Park let that email sit on the screen. Then she turned to Dalton. Mr. Dalton, what did you understand certain demographics to mean? Black people, brown people, anyone who wasn't white. Dalton's voice broke. We all knew what it meant. We just pretended we didn't. The defense tried to argue that the email was taken out of context, that Vance was simply discussing legitimate security concerns. But the damage was done. The jury had seen the blueprint. Wade Montenegro testified in the third week. He walked to the stand looking younger than his 23 years, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit his hands, shaking visibly. Park treated him gently, knowing he was both victim and perpetrator. Mr. Montenegro, can you describe the training you received from Sentinel Security Solutions? Wade took a deep breath. We had 2 weeks of classroom training. The first week was basic stuff: how to write reports, emergency procedures, legal boundaries. The second week was advanced risk assessment. That's where they taught us how to profile people without calling it profiling. Can you give the jury an example? They'd show us scenarios, like a customer enters wearing a hoodie and baggy pants, They're looking at expensive electronics. What do you do? And the correct answer was always to increase monitoring. Or, someone's using a credit card that doesn't match their appearance. What's your next step? And we were supposed to verify identity. They never said to watch black people specifically. But all the examples, all the scenarios they marked as high risk, they were always describing black or Latino customers. Did you understand that you were being taught to racially profile? Wade was quiet for a long moment. I didn't think about it in those terms. I thought I was learning how to do my job. But yes, looking back now, I understand that's exactly what they were teaching me. They were teaching me to see people who looked like Detective Chambers as threats. And on the night of September 28th, when you encountered Detective Chambers at the gas station, what were you thinking? I was thinking she fit the profile. That's how they'd trained me to think. Black woman, average car, corporate card. It was exactly the kind of inconsistency they'd taught me to flag. So I didn't listen when she told me she was a detective. I'd been trained to trust the profile over what people said about themselves. The prosecution rested after Wade's testimony. The defense called their own experts corporate consultants, who testified that Sentinel's training was industry standard, that risk assessment necessarily involved some profiling, that the executives couldn't be held responsible for how individual guards applied general principles. But their arguments felt hollow after the emails after Dalton's testimony, after Wade's admission. On the fourth week, Quincy took the stand. Park's direct examination was straightforward, walking her through the events of that night in detail. Quincy kept her voice steady, her answers clear, even when describing the moment Wade's hand had grabbed her wrist, the moment her head had hit the car, the moment she'd realized that her badge and her words meant nothing in the face of his trained prejudice. "Detective Chambers," Park said gently, "can you describe how this incident has affected your life?" Quincy took a breath. "I can't pump gas without anxiety anymore. I can't use my work credit card without wondering if someone's going to question whether it's really mine. I second-guess every interaction with security guards, store employees, even other police officers. I've been trained through trauma to expect to be disbelieved, to expect that how I look will matter more than who I am or what I've accomplished." "Has it affected your work as a detective?" "Yes. I'm more cautious now, more aware of how bias operates, how it can override evidence and logic. That makes me better at my job in some ways. But it's also exhausting. Every day I have to decide whether to speak up about bias or let it slide, whether to educate or protect myself, whether to be the diversity spokesperson people want, or just a detective trying to do her job." Cross's cross-examination was aggressive, but careful. He tried to suggest she'd escalated the situation, that her refusal to immediately show ID had been confrontational, that she was playing the race card for financial gain. "Detective Chambers," Cross said, pacing in front of the witness stand, "isn't it true that this entire incident could have been avoided if you'd simply complied with Mr. Montenegro's request for identification?" Quincy met his eyes steadily. "I did comply. I told him I was reaching for my ID. He grabbed me before I could get it." "But initially you questioned his authority to ask correct. I asked if I was being detained. That's not confrontational. That's knowing my rights. Or it's being difficult, being combative. Or it's being a black woman who's learned that compliance doesn't always guarantee safety. That sometimes you get shot anyway. That sometimes your hands are up and you still die. So, yes, I asked questions. That's not a crime, Mr. Cross. It's survival." The courtroom went silent. Cross tried to recover, to suggest she was being dramatic, but the jury's expressions had shifted. They'd seen the video. They knew what had happened. And they'd just heard a decorated police detective admit she was afraid of the very systems meant to protect her. The defense had no response to that truth. Closing arguments came in the final week of March. Spring was fighting winter outside the courthouse windows, sunshine breaking through clouds like hope pushing through despair. Park stood before the jury one last time. Members of the jury, you've seen the evidence. You've heard the testimony. You've read the emails. You know what happened here. Sentinel Security Solutions built a training program designed to teach racial profiling without using those words. They did it deliberately. They did it knowingly. They did it for profit. And when people like Dr. Hammond tried to warn them, they silenced those warnings. When guards like Wade Montenegro hurt people, they buried those incidents under settlements and NDAs. They created a system that treated people of color as inherently suspicious. And Detective Quincy Chambers paid the price for that system. She paused, letting her words settle. The defense wants you to believe this was all a misunderstanding, that these were just businessmen trying to run a company, that the racist outcomes were accidental, unintended, unpredictable. But you've seen Richard Vance's email. You've heard Marcus Dalton's testimony. You know the truth. They knew exactly what they were doing. They knew guards would profile minorities. They knew people would be hurt. They just didn't care, because profit mattered more than people. Cross's closing was polished and passionate, arguing that the prosecution had criminalized standard business practices, that intent mattered more than outcome, that social media outrage shouldn't override reasonable doubt. But his words felt like echoes of a dying argument, the last gasps of a system desperately trying to defend itself. The jury deliberated for 4 days. 4 days of waiting, of second-guessing, of wondering if justice was possible or just another false promise. On April 2nd, they returned with a verdict. Guilty. On all counts. All 7 defendants. The courtroom erupted. Plaintiffs wept. Reporters rushed for the doors. The defendants sat in stunned silence as the judge read each verdict one after another, a litany of accountability that felt almost surreal. Outside, Quincy stood on the courthouse steps, surrounded by Rosa Marcus Jennings, David Dr. Hammond, and dozens of other plaintiffs who'd found their voices through her courage. The cameras captured every moment as Jasmine Cole read a statement about justice and change and the beginning of a new era. But Quincy wasn't thinking about statements or cameras. She was thinking about a Thursday night 6 months ago when she'd just wanted to pump gas and go home, about how one moment of prejudice had unraveled into this massive tapestry of testimony and truth. "How do you feel?" a reporter called out. Quincy stepped to the microphone. "I feel like 400 years of pain finally got heard. I feel like my ancestors who were profiled and punished and never got justice would be proud. I feel like maybe, just maybe, we're finally learning that bias isn't just personal, it's systematic, and it can be changed." The settlements came quickly after the verdict. Sentinel Security Solutions, already bankrupt, liquidated everything. The $10 million victim compensation fund grew to $40 million from additional corporate assets. Every plaintiff received compensation. Every NDA was voided. But more importantly, the laws began to change. The Chambers Act, named after Quincy, passed through Congress with bipartisan support. It mandated federal oversight of private security training, required bias audits for all security firms with government contracts, and created a national database tracking discrimination complaints. 12 states passed their own versions. The security industry scrambled to revise training programs. Corporate America took notice. 1 year after the gas station incident, Quincy stood in that same Apex gas station parking lot. The company had invited her for a ceremony. They'd installed a plaque on the ground where everything had happened, dedicating the space as a reminder that change starts with courage. The plaque read, "On this spot, Detective Quincy Chambers refused to be silent. Her courage sparked a movement. Her truth demanded justice. Her strength changed the world. May we never forget that dignity is not negotiable, and freedom means nothing without equality." Quincy stared at those words, feeling the weight of everything they represented. The pain, the fight, the cost, the victory. Captain Blackwood stood beside her. "How's it feel to be immortalized in bronze? Weird, humbling, terrifying." "Good, you should be terrified, because now you're responsible for living up to it." Quincy smiled. "No pressure or anything. Just a little." He squeezed her shoulder. "You did good, Chambers. Better than good. You changed things." Later that evening, Quincy pulled into that same Pump 7. She used her fleet card to fuel her car just like she had a year ago. But this time the security guard, a young black woman, smiled and waved. This time nobody questioned her right to be there. This time she just pumped her gas and went home. And that simple, ordinary moment felt like the greatest victory of all. Because justice isn't just about punishment for the guilty. It's about freedom for the innocent. Freedom to exist without suspicion. Freedom to move through the world without having to constantly prove your humanity. Freedom to stop at a gas station and just be tired and ready to go home. Detective Quincy Chambers had fought for that freedom, had bled for it, had transformed her worst moment into a catalyst for change. And now, driving home through the Atlanta night, she finally felt like she could breathe again. The road ahead was still long. Bias wouldn't disappear overnight. Prejudice wouldn't vanish because of one verdict. But progress had been made. Systems had been challenged. Voices had been heard. And somewhere in America tonight, another person of color would walk into a store or pump gas or use their credit card without being profiled because Quincy had refused to accept that discrimination was inevitable. That was enough. That had to be enough. Because change doesn't happen all at once. It happens in moments. In courage. In refusing to be silent when silence is expected. It happens when one woman makes one phone call that destroys an empire built on prejudice and builds something better in its place. It happens when we choose to believe that justice is possible, even when the world tells us to give up. And it keeps happening one brave soul at a time until the world we dream of becomes the world we live in. Detective Quincy Chambers drove home that night, knowing she'd been part of something bigger than herself. Knowing that her pain had meaning. Knowing that her courage had mattered. And knowing that tomorrow she'd wake up and do it all again. Because the work was never finished. Justice was never final. Change was never complete. But it was possible. And that possibility was worth fighting for. Always.